joking. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Ahlan wa sahlan. My name is Nada Farhat. I will be the moderator for today's webinar, Lebanon WILPF Speaks, Challenges, and Hope. First, I would like to remind you that this meeting will be recorded. If you like to save the chat, go to the chat button, and on the right, there's 3 dots, click Save Chat toward the end. I would also like you to honor our speakers and keep yourself muted. We encourage you to send in the questions to the chat, and we will try to get to them as soon as we can and as time allows too, because we do have a question that was emailed to the email beforehand. So we will get to those first. From its initial foundation in 1915, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF, believed that the participation of women in the decision-making process is necessary for sustainable peace. WILPF Lebanon section has been proactive in the peace process since its foundation in 1962. Being a parliamentary democratic republic, Lebanon has a confessional framework in which the highest from specific religious sects. It is a democracy. However, unlike traditional democracies, each religion, and that leaves little room for actual democracy, really, and that plays a part. The issues that have destroyed our homeland, but there has always been rebuilding despite the destruction. There has always been hope, and there has always been civilians willing to go above and beyond for social justice and peace. The mission of today's webinar really is to shed light on situation in Lebanon and to show the tireless decision-making process. In today's webinar, we will discuss the impact of U.S. foreign policies on Lebanon, and most importantly, what can we do to build solidarity with our Lebanese sisters? Our first speaker is Ferial Hamdan. Ferial is a WILPF member. She has been a WILPF member since 1992. She served as the WILPF Lebanon Vice President. She led advocacy efforts for the United Social Security Resolution, active in her efforts towards sustainable peace. Thank you for being with us, Ferial. Can you tell us about the history of WILPF Lebanon?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Ferial Abu Hamdan, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about WILPF Lebanon, Lebanese Committee for Peace and Freedom. To begin with, Mrs. Anisa Najar and her story with WILPF goes back to the 60s, when Mrs. Madeleine Bouchoro was conducting a study in the oppression of the Palestinian Arabs in Israel, as in another part in Beirut. Bouchoro recommended assigning Mrs. Anisa Najar to WILPF to establish a committee affiliated in Lebanon. Anisa Najar was born in 1913. She graduated from the American University of Beirut in 1936 with a BA in Social Sciences and Education. Early in her life, Najar fought in defense of human rights and women's rights, in particular, crowning her struggle with the formation in 1953 of the first of its kind rural development community in the Arab world, called Village Welfare Society, to promote and support rural women through enabling them to become economically productive by building capacity in income-generating projects in several regions in Lebanon, which is called now Empowering Women Economically and Entrepreneur Projects. She also established a number of clinics and schools. On the initiative of the pioneer of women's development work and the Lebanese pioneer of women's rights, Mrs. Anisa Najar believed in the necessity to affirm the Lebanese woman the need for her openness to the world globally. Since then, Mrs. Anisa Najar had made every effort to form the committee WILPF Lebanon at a time when the Palestinian issue was the central issue in Lebanon and the door through which women entered politics. In 1962, WILPF Lebanon was established. by the name LCPF Lebanese Our Independence, and it was the first organization registered for peace and president of the WILPF International 2 times in 1977 and 1983. A Lebanese featuring Najar's face and the name soon after her 100th birthday. She was also awarded the Lebanese Order of Merit Medal twice and the Lebanese Army Shield. In 1964, WILPF International and had initiated a dialogue by correspondence that involved members of the Israeli and the Lebanese section. International Chairman Edith Ballantyne that such difficult issues should be discussed in accordance with the aim of WILPF to study, make known, and help abolish the political, economical, and psychological causes of war, and to work for a constructive peace. Mrs. Anisa Najar, who believed in direct negotiation, invited a WILPF delegation to visit the East. Mrs. Anisa was also working then with a Palestinian feminist pioneer, Mrs. Saba Al-Fahoum, who joined WILPF Lebanon. The mission was sent to the Middle East in 1967. Ingrid Jawan, of the president of the Palestine Arab Women's League, Mrs. Saba Al-Fahoum, and with the support of the Nobel Committee, visited Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan. WILPF Lebanon's strong commitment to League ideology and goals not only influenced the movement's approach to the Arab-Israeli conflict, but also ensured the group's integration and participation in the WILPF community. WILPF Palestine was officially established in 1989. A distinguishing feature of LCPF, WILPF Lebanon, is that in 2006, in close partnership with the Village Welfare Society, WILPF Lebanon, the members felt the need to work on a low profile for safety purposes. The founder of WILPF Lebanon and Village Welfare Society, Mrs. Anisa Najar, recalls that the term peace and freedom in the 60s, in the middle of the Cold War era, as pro-Soviet Union, and Lebanon was a hub of international activities. Moreover, from the other side, going to the international WILPF meetings where Israel are present during the period preceding the peace process, constituted a high risk that the LCPF founding mothers took it upon themselves and thus chose to utilize the partnership and the venue of Village Welfare Society as a refuge to enable them to function as low-key as can be. And that's our how we start.
Thank you so much, Ferial. This is wonderful. The history of WILPF Lebanon speaks for itself, and it still does, regardless of the challenges that we are faced with every day. Our next speaker is Hala Kilani. Ms. Kilani has a background in international affairs, journalism, and anthropology. She's speaking from her current position at the Climate Action Network. She will add that perspective to our discussion today. In your opinion, Hala, how do you think the new generation perceive the official role of especially when you talk about the new generation? How do you see that in your opinion?
Thank you, Nada, and thanks everyone for being here. I will contextualize this discussion a bit because I'm aware that many people probably don't know how this is connected to the history of foreign policy, of the US foreign policy or role in Lebanon. So since the French mandate ended in 43, we had a secular constitution in Lebanon. But the political system that was born was took a sectarian course. It was multi-partite, so we have multiple parties in power, but in fact, though they talk about an agenda for socialist change, they actually represent the communities and their sects, and they claim that they are protecting their clan. And this is how they rally power and influence. So just to give you an example, we have a party called the Progressive Socialist Party. From the name, you would think that this progressive and what have you, but in fact, it represents the one community, which is the Druze community. You might have heard of its leader, Walid Jumblat, the current leader. So also the Free Patriotic Movement, the Lebanese forces, their movement represents, led by the Hariris, represents the Sunnis. Hezbollah and the Amal movement represent the Shia communities in Lebanon. So also please bear in mind here what I'm saying, because probably your knowledge of Hezbollah is quite different, but it actually represents a big community in Lebanon. In comparison to the wider context, and you've all seen that there was uprisings in all the Arab world where people tried to rise, and especially youth tried to change and topple their dictators. In Lebanon, we have all these dictators. So it's much harder for us to topple them. And recently, and my colleague Diala will talk a lot about the current revolution, the revolution of the 17th of October, really, really difficult for us to change. Now, these political parties have played an important, they were a major factor in impeding the emergence of a strong and functional secular state in Lebanon, right? But, the foreign policy of the US has not played a constructive role neither, because it is driven by narrow interests and the one-sided pro-Israel foreign policy in the region, and pro-oil as well. So this has not been helpful to the region at all. Although, just to go back, the United States, when it refused to take any mandates in the region, it was really popular in this part of the world. And it was respected throughout the Middle East. Americans were seen as good people, untainted by the selfishness and duplicity associated with the Europeans, that brought modern medicine and set up educational institutions all over the Middle East. We have, as a very important example in Lebanon, which is the American University of Beirut. You might have heard of it. It came into being through these missionaries, and it's an institution that stands as a beacon for good education and has played a very important role, especially providing medical services throughout the wars and conflicts that Lebanon has witnessed. So it also built very solid bridges between the US and Lebanon. So you have lots of Lebanese great minds that were that you probably see in everyday life in the US that have been that graduated from this university. It has played a role. So for example, the first Arab world female photographer in the Arab world is an AUB graduate. Amal Modallali, which was now, she's the first Lebanese woman to hold that position. And numerous, Zaha Hadid, the biggest name in architecture, and the woman in architecture is a graduate from AUB. So that was the kind of relationships that how it started with the US. But since World War II, the scene completely changed. And now the perception of the US is completely different because, as you remember, at the time there was the conflict, the Cold War with the Soviet Union. So it was basically built on that and on the oil interests and on the one-sided support to Israel. So the US became a direct intervener in Lebanon and the wider region. It also, under the Truman administration and under domestic political pressure, it pushed for a solution and resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And in May 1948, we saw Israel came into existence. So since that time, we have had very the perception of the US has become different. Now, what the implications were on Lebanon and why now the kind of perception is sort of tilting towards the negative is because, from the Lebanese people's perspective, the issues in Palestine, of course, we had an influx of refugees, which Shirine will talk about later on, which they haven't got. And that created a lot of tensions inside the country because this is a sectarian, these are mostly Sunni Muslims, and it played a really adverse civil strife that happened in Lebanon. But also, we see a lot of double standards, supporting the peace process, it is supporting governance and democracy and advancing human rights. And not much mention on women's rights, by the way, and I think Shirine will elaborate on that as well. But the reality is this unequivocal is continuously pounding Lebanon and violating its sovereignty and airspace, and has the highest record of human rights violations. So if you just Google the one country that has had the most violations, like as of 2013, Israel has been condemned in 45 resolutions by the United Nations Human Rights Council since the creation of the council in 2006. So it has been resolving resolutions condemning Israel than on the rest of the world combined. And so when the US comes and with a narrative saying that we support human rights and democracy, that is not what we see on the ground, especially from the perspective in Lebanon. And most recently, like many wars, but most recently the 2006 war was extremely destructive. I, for myself, was involved with the International Union for Protection of Nature at the time, and there was a very big oil spill. I am not sure if you heard about it, and that was the result of the bombing of a power plant, a coastal power plant, and so that polluted the Mediterranean Sea. And for the first time, there was a UN resolution holding the Israel accountable for play part in like getting that UN resolution together, but it stayed a General Assembly resolution. Never were able to secure a UN Security Council Chapter 6 resolution against Israel because of the veto power of the US. So there was Lebanese who have suffered a lot as a result of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
I have.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's okay. This is wonderful. I mean, I think we can speak for our treatments and all the history of that's happening in Lebanon. I would like to get back to you in some questions from the audience, specific questions, so then we can really tap into the details. Let's move on to our next speaker. But before we go on, I'd like to remind us also stay muted, just so then when the speaker is talking, we can listen and we can hear them. Our next speaker is Attorney Diala, has been known for advocating legal protection for human rights in Lebanon. Her judicial battles against torture and abuse of power have placed her on major news stations in the heat of things. Welcome, Diala, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Can you unmute yourself? Can you tell us briefly about the political and the economical struggles in Lebanon? And where is Lebanon on the tell us what's in that regard today? I know there's a lot to talk about.
That's a lot to talk about in 8 minutes. So I will try to summarize, especially the past year in the history of Lebanon, because I believe that the last year could have been one of the worst years in terms of economy and financial situation, but also in terms of the huge catastrophic explosion of Beirut port on the 4th of August 2020, in terms of committing international crimes against peaceful protesters during the protest that started in Lebanon on the 17th of October 2019, and still continuing despite of the lockdown that made the protesters really expressing their anger with this government during the recent few months, not until this month. It's important to talk firstly about the economic crisis, which started mainly in mid-2019 and affected the banking system, the private sector, the currency rate, the jobs. Since Lebanon is the third most indebted country in the world after Japan and Greece, and one with the highest interest of debts and internal debts, what happened is Lebanon, starting 2020, the government was incapable of really funding its normal spending in public sectors. Normally not only because of the financial crisis and the high rate of in terms of the internal debts. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, but also because of the very ugly corruption in Lebanon, something that is not usually something that became a kind of normal practice for people in office, including those in senior positions or very small positions in public and governmental institutions. Actually to the Lebanon now is seen as one of the 20th most corrupted countries in the world, according to the World Economic Forum. The main in public sectors or sectors of public services in Lebanon are during the civil war. We still do not have 24-hour electricity. We have no public of any type, no trains, no trams, no public buses, not anything. All this, and especially the government to create illogical taxes, actually, to try to reduce the budget deficit, made people to become angrier. And this is how the protest of 17th of October started. It was when the government announced that they were going to actually start putting taxes on the usage of e-communication tools such as WhatsApp calls. So the young generation started to protest in almost every region, in every main city in Lebanon. The main slogan was the same. it was كلهم يعني كلهم, all of them means all of them. And the slogan kind of united people against their traditional political people, to make them more affiliated with leaders of sects instead of a government and a parliament and a state. Speaking of the financial and crimes and crimes of corruption committed by officials, the judiciary tried to look nice in front of the protesters and started some judicial proceedings against a few officials, but it was only a process to show that there are attempts actually to fight corruption, but no one was really put behind jails. No one's funds or bank accounts were seized in Lebanon. No one among the officials in office or those who were in office during the last decades. In the middle of all of this, I have to mention that the protests were confronted by and forced by the police and also by the army. Hundreds of protesters were beaten, and some of them were kidnapped by the army intelligence. A couple were killed, actually. And in the middle of all this, a huge explosion hit Beirut in its port. Lebanon was suddenly on the international map of the most catastrophic non-armed or explosives. 6 months after this explosion, which killed over 200 people and destroyed the houses of hundreds of thousands of people living in the very crowded city of Beirut, was also destroyed by the explosion. After 6 months, the judicial system and the judges who are looking into this crime in Lebanon are yet not capable of explaining or providing a logical explanation or any scenario of how these explosives that were stocked actually in the port and which exploded, yet we don't know how. They still don't have any explanation on how these explosives reached Beirut or why they were stocked for 7 years in this port, or who kept them stocked and who should be held responsible for this. We still don't know actually whether or not this is actually part of an external attack, terrorist attack, or it was. So after 6 months in a country that has almost never reached a conclusive or a conclusion about the truth in major crimes such as assassination, terrorist attacks, Lebanon has almost no faith in what could these investigations turn. There have been some calls for international interference in terms of making this crime looked into and inspected and investigated on an international level. I believe that this could be the only hope for the Lebanese people and also for the neighboring countries, since crime and this explosion actually was heard in Cyprus and affected the environment of the one additional very critical event took place in Lebanon during the last week. It is the assassination of one of the most courageous activists and journalists and writers in Lebanon, Luqman Slim. This assassination led people in Lebanon to think again about the series of assassination, political assassinations to politicians and writers and journalists who took place since 2005 and until 2000. The crimes of which Hezbollah was accused by a lot Lebanese. And this is how the Special Tribunal of Lebanon was established to try the perpetrators of these crimes gradually, starting with the first crime, the assassination of Hariri. So people are now rethinking that maybe this might just be another phase of assassination, another new chapter of the killing as a tool to express one opinion, or as a tool to just silence those who have in opposing opinions in Lebanon. I have to remind those who don't know a lot of Lebanon politics is that those who are in power now, those political parties who have been ruling Lebanon, at least for the recent 3 or decades, have been historically allies with the regime in Syria, the regime of Bashar al-Assad. And this is something to be mentioned. Since this event is directed to the USA or the new American administration, it is because we know that several individuals in Lebanon, including individuals in public office, were sanctioned by the United States according to Caesar law, which I totally, and many human rights advocates in Lebanon I believe is a very good tool to fight impunity in Syria and to stop those who are feeding the regime of Assad. But I believe that now, speaking about all this, so how many minutes now?
I think we're done. I don't interrupt you because this
okay.
is
so last thing to say, what is
about. But I want to come back to this, Diala.
Okay.
I don't want to lose this thought. We want to come back to this. We want to hear more about this for sure, and go back to the Caesar law and discuss how that implications on Lebanon. We're going to move to the next speaker of the day, Ms. Shirine Jurdi. Shirine is a Middle East and North Africa MENA region representative. In March 2019, Shirine joined the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict as the MENA Regional Liaison Officer. Shirine has been active with the Permanent Peace Movement on disarmament issues, and she is currently a team leader. Welcome, Shirine. Thank you for joining us. Shirine, after hearing from your colleagues from Diala and Ferial, how do you see the peace building process in the area, and especially in Lebanon? And how can the international community and will US contribute and help out?
First, I want to thank you, Nada, Tura, the Middle East Committee, WILPF USA, and all the participants here. It feels a pleasure to be here, and it feels like we're sharing both our pain and our hopes. Hopefully, it's a new venture for us to start something. Like now that you have listened to the promising work that St. Anisa did with the beginning of WILPF with Ferial, listening to Hala and Diala looking at aspects of a failed state. Just to begin, planning has never been a more futile endeavor than the period we are currently witnessing. It might not be an exaggeration to say that far beyond significant changes that are affecting our daily life, new to be presenting themselves at an unprecedented rate. This leads to an inevitable conclusion that before we undertake into the discussion about peace building, it would seem that we are unfortunately forced to take a step back and discuss state building. To start with, I think we need to look also, like from the discussion, we can see 3 key points to look at: authority, responsibility, and it cannot be questioned, and responsibility cannot put under scope. What we have been witnessing, so what are the pillars of peace building within a Lebanese context, I mean, with state building. If you want to the protest, and we go back to the slogans that were raised during the revolution, slogans that as Diala now was mentioning, of those who are ruling, who have been ruling for years and years within a patriarchal masculinity, hegemonic power that excludes everybody. Everybody. It's not only the exclusion of women, it's not only the exclusion of society, it's the exclusion of everyone. So the revolution came, it sets these slogans of ليسقط نظام الأبوية, let down with this patriarchal regime, let down with the regime in general, with the equality in terms of personal status law that women are not able to have, because according to the Lebanese law, a Lebanese woman married to a foreigner is not able to give her the nationality to her children nor husband. Whereas a Lebanese man married to a foreigner is enabled within 1 year to give his Lebanese nationality to his wife. And if he dies, then her children from a previous marriage can have a Lebanese nationality, like a mess within the personal status law. So women were calling for that. Women were calling for of equality before the law. People were calling even for the right to have a state. They were calling for separation of power. They were calling for equality in front of the institution, for state building, for institution building. So it seems that there was a gap that was obvious in the revolution between those who are governed and those who are being at the grassroots. Here, like we have certainly messages that we will come at the end with what kind of support we can help each other. The baseline that the Lebanese had was the Ta'if agreement, because after all, like we had after the civil war, we had this document that ended the war, though it did not end the conflict. Maybe we don't have an armed conflict now to shed light on. So we did not have transitional justice. So this is also something that protesters were calling for. The protesters even reached out to call and support for other revolutions that were happening at the Chile, in Sudan, in Iraq, in Palestine. So it was a universal one. Queer society were able to play a major role in the slogans that were carried out during these protests with this kind of freedom. This is part of the political system's way out. Way of participating or of having your voice heard. But on the grassroots, in these private, on these public spaces, you are able to say whatever you want. You are able to have whatever kind of discussion you want. Why? Because it's a free space to let these 18 communities talk. It's just a way out, but actually it doesn't have a missionaries, and the protesters were also able to talk about the refugees. We will come in a way in a while for refugees. The revolution was also able to put the key components of a state building, that is a social cohesion, the kind of bringing communities together from different geographical locations, from different religious backgrounds, from different ethnic, from different religious backgrounds, classes. They were all united in this protest. They were all able to discuss some kind of issues that has to do what kind of Lebanon we want. And it was at the heart of preserving the sovereignty and preserving the identity and preserving the Lebanon that we wanted to have, because this year is the 100th anniversary of the creation of Greater Lebanon. I mean, last year, 2020 was the 100th anniversary of the creation of Greater Lebanon. Unfortunately, we were faced with, so for us to be able to go to state building, we need first to go into state building, which requires all what I've mentioned, which includes basically the infrastructures for peace that are lacking. Unfortunately, as Hala started with, it's the political personnel, the individuals who were able to keep this Lebanon as part of what they wanted, and they did not build the institutions. For that reason, also according to what Diala was saying, for us to have a state building, we need to have accountability. To have accountability, we have now to have and to call, and for us, like now with WILPF USA, to call for the R2P. What is the R2P? On with by the General Assembly in 2005. It says that the sovereignty of the state is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. And we have seen with the many assassinations, and it was clear cut with the explosion, that either the Lebanese government is unable, and the Lebanese government did not ask for international support, then it's the responsibility of the international community to step in to provide protection for people. So this is one of the things that we call for. Second, I think this is also major in terms of about arms. Oh, thank you for sharing this. This is one of the things that we did in the revolution in terms of dialogue. It was some kind of like a conflict between the two groups, with those who want this revolution and this state building, and the others who are still attached to their political leaders. Then we called for a march so that we can, our intention is to keep this dialogue, and our intention is to reach out, because this is what is Lebanon all about. As Pope said, Lebanon is a رسالة، is شو الرسالة هلا ضاعت أنا is
Message.
هلا
It's a message. It's a message.
it's a message.
Yeah.
It's a mission.
Yeah. So Lebanon is a message. It's a message of forgiveness. It's a message of dialogue, and we did succeed in that. The first thing when I heard the explosion is calling her, and she. So just to see that this is something that we just need to reach out to each other. Maybe I will talk about later about the issue of arms and what we need also to work on collectively with the US and the US administration, and what kind of a UN-led initiative we need, and the new President Biden's new administration, what kind of initiatives is needed for this state building in Lebanon. Thank you.
Okay, Shirine, thank you so much for the valuable information. And we are going to go back to some of them. We do have questions. So just easier to hear if we keep you muted, and mute yourself if you want to talk at some point as time allows. But for now, we're going to go through the questions that they came through the email first. And the first question have is about UNRWA, and I think Shirine, would you like to answer that, or Hala? And I'm going to give the floor to Tura. She's going to go ahead and read the question. Tura. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to see the question.
You want me to read it? I have it in front of me.
Please read it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So the first question that came, and like I said, it came to the email. It says, how is the status of the Palestinians and how was it infected by the influx of the most recent refugees from Syria and elsewhere to Lebanon? Does the United Nations Relief of Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees still have take responsibilities for the Palestinians in Lebanon, and while others are under the jurisdiction? You know, this question, it's a good question because UNRWA, Palestinian refugees were under the UNRWA protection. So we want qualified, you know. And finally, what has been the consequences of the US withdrawal of support to the United Nations on behalf of refugees? Here we go. We have the question.
Go ahead, Shirine. Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think whoever asked this question, this is a very moral, actually, a moral question and an ethical one. Upon the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 and the expulsion of 1.3 million Palestinians who had to flee to different countries, upon the creation of this refugee issue, UNRWA was created with a mandate of the right to return 194 and the ethical obligation to sustain the Palestinian. The Palestinian refugee has a special provision within international law, unlike any refugee. So within UNRWA, you can find generations, like it's the grandfather, the father, the son. So the whole generation has been starting since the 1948. So it's a moral obligation for countries to keep on donating for UNRWA until this political issue is solved and the right to return in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 194 is implemented, and the right of self-determination for the Palestinian as well. It's their right to know whether they want to go back to Palestine, whether they want to go somewhere else, whether they want to stay in Lebanon. Now, regarding the Palestinian status in Lebanon, first, let me tell you that Lebanese government is not entitled to help the Palestinian refugee in any way. As you've seen, like Lebanese government is unable even to protect nor to provide any kind of this demographic, political, confessional system. The demography of Palestinians that are present in Lebanon are Sunni. And also, like Lebanese government does not want to have a settlement of Palestinian in, and hence the political system. So regarding settlement, this is something at least for the time being is not adopted by the state. Second, it's really sad to see when so everything that their education, their medical equipment, their allowances, add to that the Lebanese government does not allow Palestinians to have many of the job opportunities that belong to syndicates. So they are allowed very cheap labor. Sorry to say this. But the sad thing is that when the Palestinian Syrian refugees came to Lebanon, they felt sad for the Lebanese Palestinian refugees. They saw the miserable life that the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon were living with. So this is like even before the cut of the UNRWA. The cut of the budget of the US from the UNRWA came as a Palestinian refugees. Now they had to share the schooling system, they had to share the books, they had to share the medical support. So with everything that the Palestinian Lebanese refugee and the Syrian refugee has to pass through Lebanese also like economy. I mean, we're facing a huge problem with a hyperinflation. 100 or 400 times the prices increased. Third, also, we have COVID. So COVID and those overpopulated area, lack of resources. So this is like relation that is at in custody of this mandate of UNRWA. So one of the recommendations that we call for in this, and we thank the person who asked this question, is to push the Biden administration to resume to support UNRWA, and for us also as individuals to help those, because of that might happen with these young people who are at the risk of drugs being taken to camps that they do not want to, and the affiliations of where they can be easily taken as child soldier. This is in brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirine. Thank you. This is amazing. I don't think the 90 minutes is enough for this conversation. We have another question. Sarah?
Describe your most important ally organizations outside of Lebanon, and how do you work together on common concerns?
Hala, would you like to answer that?
I'm not sure if they mean ally to the WILPF or ally to in general.
I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine allied to the peace movement, to the women's peace movement and the organization on the ground that they are coming through for WILPF Lebanon and for other organizations.
Okay, I don't think we have one specific ally. I think that society internationally and several countries that have been trying to channel aid to Lebanon for various economic development or medical services have all been extremely helpful. However, I would like just to make a comment on the fact that, I would encourage, especially that, the audience here is from WILPF US. That kind of tailored aid that is not led by foreign policy priorities that Lebanon is suffering from. And we have seen the UPR circulate team set the priorities of Lebanon. And there's need for fundamental work on infrastructure, halting pollution, tackling climate change, women's issues, as Shirine mentioned. You see, but it's really against a lot of odds. When it comes to our personal lives that are managed by laws, they're completely, unequal. So all that we do is we do it we're lucky to have, as I mentioned, good educational systems, like private educational systems in Lebanon, and that's what really empowers women. But we need a lot of more focused work, especially directed towards domestic violence, and just changing completely the laws currently government. It's really high time. I see a lot of attention on Gulf countries, women driving whatever in the US. That is not important at all. I mean, whether a woman drives or not is not anyone can snatch her children from her at any point in time, which is the confessional system that governs Lebanon. We don't have civil marriage. We're having to abide by the religious laws, which are completely patriarchal. So we really need a lot of support. Civil society in Lebanon is very vibrant. It played a role in tackling the aftermath of the explosion much better than the state and in every aspect of the work. But yeah, we need to make sure that all projects are not led by the interests of foreign policy, but actually responding to the priorities of the country. So for now, I cannot say there is an ally organization out there, one particular one. There are several active organizations in the country and backing civil society, but it's not enough. I think it needs to be, it needs to deeper, tackling the deeper issues, basically.
Okay, thank you, Hala. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. The chat is going and there's so much interactive here. I love it. This is really something wonderful. We're going to move on to the questions. And George, are we putting the questions on the screen?
We are, and I am reading this question. Here we go. Uh-oh, sorry, wrong one. Here I come. Seconds away.
George has been wonderful with the technicalities. I cannot thank you enough, George.
At the moment, it's being... Many Americans don't know that the sectarian system of government in Lebanon requires certain political offices be held by members of a particular religious sects. Since this was based on population statistics from the 1932 census and religious demographics have changed since that time, can you explain how this has affected the political climate in Lebanon recently and what effect it might have on upcoming elections, government corruption?
Thank you, George. I would like to hear Diala, Chehade on this and see and get her opinion. Diala, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Nada. Sorry, I was disconnected for a minute from electricity. Yes.
Okay, you might want to change your
Yes,
name,
what is the
Diala.
question?
Go ahead. Oh, you didn't hear
again.
the question.
Okay.
All right, that's okay. Diala, while I read you the question, or maybe George will read the question again, change your name from Hala Kilani to just you, but just so people know who you are.
Yeah, it changed again. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Diala, I'm going to
Go
read the question again.
Please.
Please.
Many Americans don't know that the sectarian system Lebanese, that certain political offices be held by members of particular religious sects. Since this was based on population statistics from the 1932 census and religious demographics have changed since that time, can you explain how this has affected the political climate in Lebanon recently and what effect it might have on upcoming elections? And also speak to the question of government corruption.
Okay. The government corruption as a question is only something that could lead to hours of blabbing and details. Let me start with the first question. So, according to the what is called the National Accord, it's not written that was kind of a conciliation agreement between the Lebanese militia actually and the political party which were part of the civil war. They agreed upon agreement called Taif, which was held in the city of Taif in Saudi Arabia in 1989, I remember. So there was an agreement that the political system in Lebanon will continue to have between Muslims and Christians in terms of having the parliamentary which is elected democratic, divided between 50% of Christian and 50% of Muslims. What happened afterwards? This is the only notion which is mentioned in writing in the amended constitution. What was not mentioned in writing but was accorded as part of the conciliation agreement is to have three main religious fractions, mainly the Christian Maronite holding the presidency of the republic, the Muslim Sunnite holding the presidency of the government, and the Muslim Shiite holding the presidency of the parliament. There were no official surveys or statistic to decide scientifically on the demographics on Lebanon after these accords, and most probably since 1932. There were some approximate figures resulting from the list of what we call electoral list, or list of people who are eligible to vote in the elections. But the government in Lebanon, the official authorities, especially or most probably Christian authorities, who are in favor
Diala, are you okay?
Technical
Can you hear me
problems
now?
relating to
Internet, obviously, in
related to
Lebanon.
corruption and lack of electricity.
Absolutely. I don't know if Diala is still with us. We do have a good question that came from the audience that we can come back to Diala, because that is also what she was talking about is excellent. I like to get back to that. But for now, maybe Tura, can we go to the question that... No, not this question. We're gonna, Tura, can you hear me? We're gonna go to that question that...
Right, and I copied it into the chat and now I have to look for it. Is the question in front of you right now? Could you read it? Yeah, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I have it right here. Yes. Okay. This question came from who, Tura? Sorry. From, I'm going to read it anyway. After the explosion, I heard...
This question came from Kate Zaidan.
Okay. Kate Zaidan. Thank you so much, Kate, for the good question. After the explosion, I heard some rumors about asking for state sponsorship from France. What is the peace movement perspective on this? And who wants to answer? Shirine, go ahead, Shirine. So we're talking, so after the explosion.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that before the webinar. Actually, it's a joke. We have it every year on our Independence Day. Just to say, just like it's the feeling of the failed state, and like it's the joke, like what would have been wrong if I'm French? But this is not the true sentiment. It was just the feeling that people had on the street at the minute when President Macron was passing. So it was just like, just imagine how vulnerable people were. Nobody like even paid condolences to people. So when they saw this foreigner, a French president coming down the street, trying to console them. So it was something that that lady said out of, definitely she doesn't want to be under a French mandate or whatever, but it's just to feel, for you to see how vulnerable and sad people were. Unmute yourself, Nada. Thank you.
Nada, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Obviously, we can talk for a long time about the explosion and the ramifications of the explosions and the ongoing investigation, if there is an investigation, you know. We're going to go on to the next question that came through the email, and that would be question number 4. George or Tura?
What is Israel's role or impact in Lebanon?
And if Diala is back with us, if not, Hala, maybe you would like to.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Hello.
I spoke to that a little bit, but Israel is continuously violating Lebanon's sovereignty. It is creating, of course, security issues, instability. It has been involved in many unlawful massacres that happened in Lebanon. The problem is the media coverage, especially for you guys in the US. I don't think you get the full picture. And a lot of this narrative, one of the recommendations that I think should be put forward through this webinar is how for WILPF US to influence the narratives a little bit better. Because there is always that idea that Israel is defending itself. But this is, of course, not accurate, because it is the single most important military power in the region. You just need to look at the US military aid and how much of a chunk that goes to Israel. Every year, $3 billion go in aid to Israel from the US. That's taxpayers' money. That's taxpayers' money going into continuous violation of the Lebanese territory. And that the 2006 war was devastating. We're talking here about state building, but it is quasi impossible to be done with such a threat. Also the narrative about Hezbollah being a terrorist organization in the US. Though we do not agree with the Hezbollah agenda on many levels, and Hezbollah today is basically the party in power, just like other parties took power. Christian parties took power in Lebanon. Muslim parties took power in Lebanon before, and now it's the turn of the Shia, which are represented by Hezbollah. But it is a too narrow kind of vision of it being just a terrorist organization. It did play a role in terms of resistance to Israel, and for that we as the Lebanese people generally are appreciative, but of course we do not like other practices and the hegemony that it is currently having, or any relations that it has with the assassinations or the free expression or condoning the corruption, because it is part of government. Hezbollah is part of government. So anyhow, Israel is a threat to Lebanon, and a continuous threat to Lebanon. And the military aid that is going to Lebanon, to Israel every year, more than $3 billion, since you can find it on the internet, since many decades, since the creation of the state from the US, is not helpful. And in comparison, since 2010, the aid to Lebanon on the military side has been like $2 billion since that time, and it went to the Lebanese army is not capable or is not helped enough because of Israel. So in fact, it's turning its weapons against the protesters in Lebanon, rather than it is being a force that actually protects the country. So inevitably we'll have a Hezbollah, and it's a deadlock. So we need to really question the US support to Israel so that we can have peace in the region.
Thank
and
you
in Lebanon.
so much, Hala. Thank you so much. I want to get back to Diala a little bit. She's on with us. Diala, can we get back to your opinion? Yes, go ahead, Diala.
Is it on the same question or another one?
You could tap on this question or the question before it, because you were talking about the
Yes, just to make it
sectarian-
as brief, yeah, the
Yes,
sectarian
sure.
political system, just to make it as brief as possible.
Please.
Many aspects of the sectarian political system are not written provision in a certain political accord or agreement. It's Yes, it's simply a political agreement that is and that's remained supported regionally and internationally. The Syrian government, which has its forces all over Lebanon for over 30 years after the civil war, was keen to make the political system, the sectarian political system, remain sectarian, because the accord of what we call the Ta'if Accord, which put an end to the civil war, supposedly provided that all parties in Lebanon or militias should actually become civil and surrender their weapons to the government, which is something that did not happen. It also said that the regime, the system, the political system in Lebanon should be based eventually and gradually on a secular system, and that only there should be kind of a Congress or a specific representation for religions in what we might call House of Mish Representative, Majlis Shuyukh, that could be also defined in new regulations made in accordance with the amended constitution of Lebanon at the time. Nothing of this happened. So what the Lebanese regime kept from this agreement is namely the division of parliament between Muslims and Christians, and the distributions of the main offices, public offices, among the three main religious fractions, which are Maronite, Sunnite, and Shiite, based on the very, very old survey of 1932. What was very clear during the protest of 2019 and 2020 is that most of the people were denouncing the system, which is something that started in 2010, actually 2010, which the first protest calling for putting an end to the sectarian political regime in Lebanon, which is actually one of the tools, we believe it to be one of the main tools for corruption to be that sustainable in Lebanon, because most of the leaders have been maintaining their making their voters more, or maintaining their votes, let's say electoral votes, due to this affiliation between the sect, the religion, or the specific sect of the religion, and the leaders who should be representing this area or that area, which made it very difficult for those who do not come through religious leaders or corresponding traditional religion political leaders to be part of the of any democratic process or any election. I just want to add something when it comes to also Israel. The cause of Palestine is a very important cause for many Lebanese, not only because it was part of the civil war and it was part of what most of the parties, at least let's say either leftist parties or Muslim parties in Lebanon were supporting in their initial existence. It is not only because of this heritage of history and culture, but it is because we believe that in terms of human rights, international criteria for human rights, international decisions, whether issued by the United Nations or issued by ICJ, International Court of Justice, or now, actually only recently, the ICC seemed to have announced officially that they do have jurisdiction over crimes committed also in Palestine. So all of this make many of the Lebanese people, even those who oppose Hezbollah as a political and military entity in Lebanon, it made them continue to be in favor of supporting this cause against the crimes committed by Israeli officials. When it comes to what Lebanon would want from the United States administration in its relationship with Israel, we find it, I'm one of those lawyers, at least, who are really astonished by the statements issued by the new administration after the announcement of the ICC jurisdiction over crimes committed in Palestine. If the administration of the United States would not support an international mechanism to try perpetrators of grave crimes peacefully in a very civilized manner and in a very transparent institution, what would it support? I thought that the USA is now and has been actually playing an important role to push forward the peace building in the region. We haven't seen in what Hala mentioned, in one of the participants mentioned, we haven't seen this in action, in terms of action, in terms of this huge military support to Israel, and we haven't seen it actually in supporting alternative means of holding criminals, international criminals, accountable. So I just wanted to say that what I expect from this administration is to actually call for justice when it comes to grave crimes committed in Lebanon. But how can I expect sincerely that this could happen while the same administration is rejecting the mere idea that an international judicial body should be the resort to putting an end to conflicts and crimes in this region?
Thank you so much, Diala. Thank you. I want to just remind everybody, this is interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on the chat. If you want to save the chat, click on the chat button to the those three dots and save the chat on your computer. It will be saved on in a folder. I want to go back to the ending statement, the closing statements. Before we go to the closing statements, I want to tell you to search for WILPF US and subscribe. Send the following questions to the webinar. Join WILPF.org or WILPFUS.org in the United States. Join the movement, and really would love to see you there. I want to go to the wrapping questions, the closing statements, and we'll start with Shirine. Go ahead, Shirine.
Thank you. I think maybe one of the most important thing is the issue of armament in an area that is full of conflicts.
So, sorry, Shirine, to interrupt you, but just keep it 2 minutes. Just we want the audience to stay, with us. We don't want anybody to leave and miss on this. Okay.
So with that, I would really call for us as WILPFers, I mean, this is one of the most important things that we work on is militarization. So how can we push the administration to go back to the Arms Trade Treaty? Lebanon is a signatory state to the Arms Trade Treaty since 2019. However, it was unable to report this year. And how is also the administration able to push its allies in the region to be a state party to the ATT? I think this is one of the main messages that I want, and I want this call that we're having now to sustain itself and consecutive calls that we are able to, and for WILPF USA to support us. We have the problem, but we do not have the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you with us still?
Yeah, I think we celebrated the 100 years of independence, but really we're still suffering much more what we said, and much more. It's not taking us anywhere, and we didn't talk about the inflation in Lebanon, we can't take our money from the banks, and the unemployment rate and the hunger rate that's happening now in Lebanon, and especially with the COVID-19, it's that's captured all our life, and changing everything. So God with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Diala, are you with us still, Diala? Diala Chehade, would you like to wrap up? Hala, are you
Yes, I
Hala, are you
can.
with us? Can you hear us? Hi, Hala. Yes, go ahead. We'll go with you. Maybe Diala by then will join us. Wrapping statement, Hala. I know there is
So
time for this.
to
Go ahead.
wrap up, I just wanted to say that we saw that under the Truman administration, domestic pressure did push for foreign policy and a role of the US in the Arab-Israeli. I think that we want to count on allies like you, WILPF US, to develop an advocacy plan and lobbying plan in order to get a narrative change, a mindset change towards the Middle East. I think I've accompanied many American journalists to the camps, to the Palestinian camps, and to see the perspective of Lebanon in this whole situation. It is important that we get that kind of justice that underpins peace in the region. Without justice, without us the conflict on just terms, like the right of return, or just a basic human rights process to come into play, we cannot have peace. And as well, like justice in terms of accountability. All the intelligence that that the US can share on the explosion, for example, because in a blind spot, and we know there's intelligence that can help us see justice in Lebanon, whether from the mafia that is ruling the country or from aggressive neighbors. We need peace, and we need your help to achieve peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hala. I can tell you this would not be the last conversation. We will have more conversations like this. There is so much to be said. I want to still hear from Diala Chehade. Attorney Diala,
yes,
still with
I'm
us?
here.
Go ahead, Diala.
Sorry for the technical problems. Yeah, I think this is great to have this, even if it was only the four of us talking. I just want to say that since we're talking about peace building in the region and in Lebanon, and the only way we have it as the only choice we have it as human rights workers and people believing in peaceful change is the rule of law. I think what is needed from major countries, the budget and funding for the Lebanese army, is to see more overlooking or more in terms of what the institutions supported and funded by the USA in Lebanon are actually, whether or not they are actually respecting our legal commitments as a state, and are not using these funds to public crimes of corruption. Many Lebanese were actually in favor of these sanctions on individuals who seem to be in violation of the Caesar law and other international treaties against terrorism and against Bashar al-Assad policy and crimes committed in Lebanon, also against small financial crimes such as financing terrorism or escaping taxes and such obligations. But I think that since the USA is state party to the same convention, the International Convention Against corruption, the same convention signed by Lebanon less than 10 years ago, I think, after it entered into force. So this treaty actually enables governments to take actions to commit to the provisions of this convention, which aims particularly to put an end to corruption and crimes committed by people in office to make illegal gain, which is something that is done by most of our officials, and which is something that actually the Switzerland, the judicial system in Switzerland made in step investigation in potential crimes, financial crimes committed by our I think it would be great if we see such actions taken by a country like the United States, which already started to affect the interest of many individuals and seniors in Lebanon who did not comply with its or its internal laws, at least. So we're talking here about an international convention, not only about the American internal provisions, legal provisions. I think it's also important to see some serious reaction, free opinions who had the habit to express their opinions to diplomatic individuals openly. So I found the statement issued by time less than expected, and I mean, what does a country like the United States of America change and calling for a positive role for the USA in Lebanon when one of the main activists among these people is without any trust or hope for any of his friends or family that serious investigation will take place in Lebanon to hold the criminals accountable. And I just want to remind that Lukman year ago written an open letter to the public naming those who he believed could be responsible for his expected assassination. So if I hope for anything from a strong country like the United States, is to see this its role taking a more positive approach in Lebanon toward peaceful and positive change and toward protection, like in terms of legitimate protection to people who are trying to make this change possible, despite of all the crimes being committed in Lebanon.
Thank you, Diala. Thank you so much. This has been enlightening. This conversation has been enlightening. The conversation will not stop here. It will go on in the future. Thank you again to save the chat. I want to remind you that this will be available 48 hours on WILPF YouTube. I want you to build on this conversation for a better tomorrow in Lebanon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks,
Have a good day.
everyone. Bye.